Hi, this is Rob Packard from Medical Device Academy. And today I'm going to teach you the 5 steps for writing a nonconformity in an audit report. So 5 steps. Step number 1, you need a reference to your audit report somewhere in the finding. Usually there will be an audit number. The reason why they have numbers is because a lot of companies do multiple audits, and over time you're going to have multiple audits in multiple years. So a company will have a log of audits, and in that log, they will have numbers for each audit. So you need a reference to which audit this finding is for. So let's say you did 12 audits this year. Which of the 12 audits is it? It might be a simple number. It might begin with the year, so 2021. And then it might say which number of audit it is. So it's the 12th audit in 2021. And then it will have a last number that will be the number of the finding, because each audit report might have multiple findings. So the total number for that reference would be 2021 12 1 for the first finding, 2 for the second finding, 3 for the third finding. You get the idea. The second part of the 5 steps is grading of the finding. Most companies in the past had major and minor. Some companies added critical. It's up to you how you grade your findings. But in the new MDSAP system, so Medical Device Single Audit Program, which is for Canada, US, Brazil, Australia, and Japan, if you have an MDSAP audit program, then you'll be following the MDSAP grading process. And that has numbers that escalate based on the importance of the area, whether it directly affects product, if it's a repeat finding, and the score could be anything from a 1 to a 5. Theoretically, the score could go up to a 6, but they truncate it with a maximum of a 5 for worst case finding. So a 1 would be a low risk finding, and a 5 would be a high risk finding. They can't recommend certification. It needs to be addressed immediately. So that's the grading. The other way of doing it, the old way of doing it, was major and minor. There are pluses and minuses to both methods, but as an internal auditor, you're not bound to one method or the other. You just need to make sure that your procedure for auditing gives you the flexibility of one method or the other. Or if the procedure says you shall do it the MDSAP method, then you shall do it the MDSAP method because your procedure says to do it that way. The third part of your audit finding or nonconformity that you're going to write in this audit report is a short description of what the finding is. Now, when I say short, I mean one sentence. It doesn't even need to be a complete sentence. It could be a phrase. And I'll give you an example of one. The corrective action, or the company failed to create a corrective action procedure, or the internal audit procedure does not appear to be adequate. Those would be examples of a short description of what the finding is. It's just a statement of this is what this finding is about. It's usually one sentence or even not even a complete sentence, and that's all you write. And if you're looking for examples of what that might be, what you can do is you can actually go to the FDA 483 inspection data set. And I provide a hyperlink down below in this video. So if you click on that hyperlink and go to that page, go down on that page, and near the bottom of the page, you'll see a whole list of Excel spreadsheets underneath the heading Download Inspectional Observation Data Sets. If you click on one of those years, it doesn't matter which year, they're all set up, they're Excel spreadsheets, they're all formatted the same way. If you open up one of those spreadsheets, you're going to see a whole bunch of tabs along the bottom. Pick up the devices tab because we're Medical Device Academy and we just do medical device audits, not other types of audits. And so you click on the devices tab and it will have all the FDA 483 inspectional observation possibilities. And they have inspectors must use those formats. And there are a bunch of different columns. The first column is citation program area. It's going to be devices for all of them. B is a site ID. I have no idea what that is. C, that's the reference number. So that's going to be 21 CFR 820 and then some number. So let's say it's 820.100A for kappa. The next item is a short description, and that's not the description that I'm suggesting that you use. It's an even shorter one that they've used to make it very easy for somebody. Oh, that's what this line item is about. An example of one would be lack of or inadequate procedures. And so that would be a general finding, but you want to write a little bit more specific. E is the column you want to look at. It's the long description, and you want the first sentence before the word specifically. And I'll give you an example. The first one on the list is procedures for corrective and preventive action have been, and then in brackets, adequately. Procedures for corrective and preventive action have not been adequately established, and adequately is in brackets. So that would be the whole sentence. Procedures for corrective and preventive action have not been adequately established. Now, you could take out the adequately. If the company has no procedure at all, then you don't need the word adequately. But if there's a minor deficiency in that procedure and one little thing is missing for it, or one thing in that procedure is not being followed, you would include that adequately part, because they're not following it exactly as it's supposed to be followed. And we come to number 4 in writing your findings. It's the requirement. And I don't see this written enough in audit reports. This is where you go back to the requirement, whether it's a procedural requirement, it's a requirement in a standard, or it's a requirement in regulation. You should state specifically what the requirement is. And this is where a lot of auditors make the mistake of, this is what I think should be there. I'm the auditor and I know everything. Well, that's not the way you write a finding. Whenever you think you might have a nonconformity, you need to go back to the source and look up exactly what the wording is. So in the case of 21 CFR 820.100A, you need to go look up that part of the regulation in the QSR and figure out exactly what that says and put that in your finding. And so when you're doing the audit, you say, this is what the findings, this is what the regulation says, this is what I'm looking for. Can you help me find this? You're looking for conformity when you're auditing. You're not doing an inspection where you're looking for nonconformity. You're looking for conformity in an audit. You will find nonconformities, but this is what I'm looking for, this part of the regulation. And if you can't find that, then you have a nonconformity. But you have to actually look for what you're looking for, not assume it's not there because you don't like the way they're doing things. If you have something that's according to a standard, you can say, well, this validation of, let's say, sterilization was done according to this standard. However, in the standard, it says to do this, and this is missing from it. I'm looking for somewhere in your objective evidence of sterilization validation where you've done this requirement in the standard. Then the third possibility would be a nonconformity written to a procedure that you have. So your procedure says you shall, I'll pick something somewhat random, but in the sterilization, you shall put internal BIs in 3 products in each load. And let's say you did 1 product in the load because this is a revalidation. Well, if your procedure doesn't say that you can do less for a revalidation, even though that might be totally acceptable to do less in that particular case, then you should actually modify your procedure to indicate what's required for a revalidation, or leave in the flexibility in the procedure, or the protocol can have less requirements for a revalidation to leave the door open for that flexibility. So you would say, you have a procedure, you've done sterilization validation, but you're not meeting the requirements of your own procedure that says specifically you have to do this. What you might have done might be perfectly acceptable according to the standard and according to regulations, but your procedure doesn't allow it. So that would be a procedural nonconformity. So you have all 3 types. You have the type where this is against the regulation, you have this is against the standard, or this is against your own procedure. So any one of those is a possibility. In the next section, the step 5, this is where you have to put objective evidence. Your objective evidence has to be factual. This isn't where you put your opinion. I feel that they're not adequately trained. I don't feel that they've adequately validated the sterilization process. I don't think they feel, your opinion doesn't matter. The procedure says this, you didn't do it. That's all you have to say. And you have to be specific. That's why the FDA in their 43 inspection observation starts with the word specifically, comma, and then 3 asterisks for this is where you enter your specific information. Don't come up with your opinion, just state the facts. And so ideally you're giving enough information in that inspection observations, or in this case an audit report, objective evidence in your audit report finding, so the person can go back to the source of the information. I looked at this person's training record. I looked at this sterilization validation record. Whatever the record is that you looked at, or whoever you spoke with, that's the objective evidence that you have to cite, and then say specifically what it was that wasn't conforming. So the procedure says this, and this is what the record said. That those two don't match. This is a nonconformity against your procedure, or against the standard, or against the regulation. And that's how you write that. The last column in the FDA inspection database is for frequency. And the particular example I gave was the highest frequency item. It was inadequate procedures or non-existing procedures for CAPA, and it was cited 165 times in 2020. If you look at the previous year, where they had a full year of inspection instead of a truncated year due to COVID, in 2019, they had over 300 for that same exact issue, and it was, once again, at the top of the list. So the number one thing the FDA is seeing is that companies are not having adequate procedures, or don't have procedures at all for the CAPA process. And so you could see how somebody might not write a very detailed procedure on how they're supposed to be performing their CAPA process, or the procedure is too detailed and they're not following the procedure. One of those two things is occurring, and that's how you get that particular finding. And it's the most common finding, and it happens to be the first thing that the FDA looks at is your CAPA process, because that's how you make your quality system better and improve it and make sure it's compliant. I'll give you another example here. So it could be that you're looking at your CAPA process, but it isn't the procedure that's not adequate. It's the record that's not adequate. And so one of the other possible findings for CAPA programs is 820.100B in the FDA system. In their wording there, and this would be the part that would be in the description before the requirement, corrective and preventive action activities and or results have not been, and then in brackets, adequately documented. What they're expecting you to do as an inspector is to write down every single time you take an action, you would write that down in the CAPA record. What people will often do is wait until they're done with a CAPA and then go back and fill in all the data, and you're not supposed to do that. What does your procedure say you're going to do? Does your procedure say that every week we're going to have a CAPA board meeting and every week we're going to update the CAPA record? If that's what it says, that's what you should do. And then if the FDA comes in on a Thursday and your meetings are usually on Thursday, the only thing that shouldn't be in that CAPA record is something that happened between the last meeting, last Thursday, and today. That should be the only stuff that's been done and not documented in that record. Everything else is in that record. If you have meetings every 2 weeks, then it should be for the last 2 weeks. The idea here is that we don't want you to have nothing in the record for months when you're working on a CAPA. And we've seen some CAPAs that last years. They shouldn't last that long, but sometimes they have to, because it's, let's say, a design revalidation. So it might be open for that long. But if your procedure says you'll do this and you're not doing that, then that's a nonconformity against your own procedure. If you don't specify and you're not documenting in your record any actions until you complete the whole thing, then they would leave out that adequately part, and they would say you're just not documenting what actions you took. You're saying what your plan is, and then you're saying it's closed, but you're not writing anything down showing what you did. And like, yes, it was done, but you don't have that in the record. So almost always that particular finding will say adequately because they'll write something down there for what they did, but it's not usually enough detail. So those are two of the most common findings for a kappa that the FDA will write. And you could have very similar findings in an internal audit. And there's nothing wrong with plagiarizing what's in the FDA's playbook on how to write their 483s and do that yourself. It's a good practice to emulate what they're doing. If you are copying what the notified body does, they're going to copy either a regulation, let's say the C marking requirements in the MDR, or they're going to be writing down what's requirement in one of the regulations if it's an MD-SAP audit, or in the ISO standard is the most common, an ISO 1345. But they're going to quote from that requirement, and so you can use the same approach and look at what your auditors are doing. But be careful. The FDA has a written playbook on how they write that nonconformity. And even though the first sentence might be good, when they write the objective evidence down below, I see a lot of FDA inspectors still don't put enough detail down that help me go back and try to recreate what they were looking at. And I have to ask the person, well, what records were they looking at when they wrote this? Because the inspector didn't write enough detail down. And you see the same thing for notified body auditors. And unfortunately, we're going to see it more because we're really spread thin globally for certification body auditors. So there aren't enough well-trained notified body auditors out there that know how to properly write this. And with the new MD-SAP program, their time is spread really thin to try to cover everything in the checklist, so they don't have time to write everything down. But as an internal auditor, you need to do that. You need to take the time to carefully write down all the objective evidence, or you make the problem worse. You get a nonconformity for your internal audit reports because you don't put enough detail down there. So those are the 5 steps on how to write a nonconformity. I'll review it one more time for you. Number 1, you write down a reference to the audit report and a number of the findings. So it could just be NCR number 1, and you at the top of the report, you have what the audit report number is. But in your log, you're going to want to keep track of the audit, the year, the audit report, and the number of the finding. Number 2, the grading of the finding, whether it's an MD-SAP system or it's major minor. Number 3, a short 1-sentence description of what the issue is, the nonconformity. Number 4, the requirement. Copy and paste the requirement. Don't ad lib here. Don't abbreviate. Copy and paste. It doesn't require any extra work to copy the whole thing. So copy it all, whatever that requirement is. In number 5, the objective evidence. If you're writing a nonconformity against a procedure, copy and paste out of the procedure. This procedure has this requirement, and paste it right in there. And then the objective evidence down below for what records you looked at that didn't meet that procedural requirement. So those are the 5 steps of writing a finding. The biggest problem we see with auditors is they aren't factual. They put in their own opinion, how they think the quality system ought to be done. And because it's not the way they would do it, it's a nonconformity in their mind. And that's not how you do an audit. Auditors are supposed to be objective. They're also supposed to write down the objective evidence that you didn't meet a specific requirement. We have some comments here. Number 1, the grading of 1 would be for the first occurrence of an indirect impact finding with no escalation rules applied. So this is it. Matthew Walker was making a note here of how the MD-SAP grading process works. You could have a 1 all the way up to a 6 with the grading process. If you have escalation rules, most of the findings for the first initial MD-SAP audit you're going to have are going to be 1s, 2s, and maybe even a 3, I think is a possibility. But you are very rarely going to see a 4 or a 5 in these situations unless you have a complete absence of a quality system requirement, in which case you shouldn't even have been having your MD-SAP audit because you're supposed to do your own internal audit first. And so you should have caught those kinds of absences before the MD-SAP auditor even showed up. Let's see here. There was a question here. What would be some good quality metrics to track for the CAPA process? So, whenever you are doing an audit of an audit process such as CAPA, one of the things that we have in the process approach, the seventh step, is what metrics do you follow? And so, oftentimes when I'll ask a process owner, hey, what are the metrics you're following for the CAPA process? I'll get a blank stare. The CAPA process for most companies, they will look at how long it takes them to write the finding, because that's something that the FDA requires. It's done in 15 business days, or the notified body must be done in 15 days or 30 days, depending on the severity of the finding. So they might track how long it takes to create a plan. Other companies will track how long it takes to close a CAPA. That one's dangerous because you have some findings that can be closed very quickly because it's a procedural change or it's a training issue. So they can complete that very quickly. Other things are going to be a design change and require a long time to complete. And so for those, you may not be able to hit your timeline. So what I prefer to have is an average CAPA closure. So what is the average aging of these CAPA? How long are they open for on average? Is it 10 days? Is it 20 days? Is it 30 days? But it's an average. So the new ones that were just open, they've opened very short amount of time. And the ones that have been open a very long time, they're going to average out to some number. And you want to trend that over time. So you don't want to see it going up, 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 getting worse and worse. And then suddenly it drops right before an audit. That's not controlled. Controlled, if you're familiar with statistical process control, you have a lower limit, you have an upper limit, and then you'll have control limits that are inside there. And you want to keep it in the control limits. And if it gets outside there, you take action. And if it reaches the upper or lower limit, that's the specification limit. Now it's an actual nonconformity. That's an SPC chart. You can do the same thing for any quality metric you want. So you could say, we're going to take action, maybe not a formal corrective action, but we're going to take some sort of action to escalate things or reprioritize things or expedite things if we get outside of this range for CAPAs. For the average aging, you don't care if it gets really short, so there's not going to be a lower limit, there's just going to be an upper limit. Some things only have upper limits, some things only have lower limits. So that would be an example of a kind of metric you would use for a CAPA process. What are good metrics specific to quality and internal auditing? So one of the things that I've actually got a blog written on, I just need to publish it, is for audit programs. So a metric for that is, what is the average aging of your reports? And it's just a suggestion. You don't have to use that metric, but if you only do one a year, right after you do that audit, your age of your report is 1 day. At the end of the year, it's 365 days old. So the average gradually increases over time to hit 365 and then drops again. That's not controlled. That means you're doing one a year, it gets worse, drops. So that the control of your average aging of audit reports isn't really controlled at all. You're just scheduling one a year. Now, if you have multiple small audits throughout the year, let's say 12, 15 audits a year, the average aging of those reports is going to be different. So my audit of CAPAs, let's say I did 2 audits of CAPA this year because we had problems with our CAPA process. And then just by doing a second audit in the year, we've cut the average aging of the CAPA audit in half down to a maximum of 180. But if we look at all the reports for all the processes, some are going to be longer because they only did one a year. Some are going to be shorter because they did 2 or 3 a year. And the average of these is going to come into some sort of an area, and I want to control that over time, or ideally drop it down lower and lower and lower. So I'm doing more audits, and the areas where I'm having problems, I'm doing those more frequently. The areas where things are not having any problems, I do those less frequently, like once a year. And the average might be somewhere in the 90 days or 50 days or 30 days for the average aging of those reports. And when I see that number starting to climb out of this zone where I want it to be, it's time to do more audits. And so I look, what is the area I haven't done an audit of in a long time? And what are the areas that are high importance or I'm having problems in? Those are the ones I would prioritize for being done next. If you do if you plan your quality system audits once a year during a manager review, then you can only react to it once a year. If you do your quality management reviews every quarter, now you can take more timely action and have better control over that metric. Now, you don't necessarily have to do it in a manager review. You could plan your audits outside of the manager reviews and just review the metrics in your annual manager reviews. That's fine. But you need some mechanism of monitoring this quality objective if you choose to have a quality objective for internal audits, and figure out how are we going to manage this so we keep it in this range where we want it to be. And when you have metrics like average aging, you're probably just going to have an upper limit, no lower limit, because 0 would be great, but we can't do an audit every single day. We have another comment here from Sharon. Thank you. ISO 1345, do the metrics need to relate to your quality policy? So there is a requirement in 1345 for establishing a quality policy, and they wanted to establish a framework for your quality objectives. But quality objectives don't necessarily automatically equal metrics. Every process should have a quality metric that you're measuring, some way of making sure that process is under control. But at the company level, in your quality manual, you don't have to have every single metric for every single process listed as a quality objective for the company. It might be a quality objective for that process. It might be a quality objective for a person whose job is, let's say, internal auditing, but not necessarily for the whole company. You really want to have the list of company quality objectives fairly small, because you want to be focusing on the things that are important for the company as a whole. What's important for the person that is the audit program manager, and that's the only job they have, is very different from what's important for the whole company. So yes, you might have a quality objective for the auditor that says, average aging of internal audits needs to be here. But at the company level, where we write the quality policy for the company, that may not be the most important thing, and probably is not. In fact, if that's your most important thing, you probably need to focus a little bit more on what are you designing and developing as a device. But a lot of times these quality policies will have will actually list certain things like customer satisfaction or on-time delivery or price. A lot of these are very superficial. You want to pick quality objectives that are specific to your company and what's important for your company. And some of those should tie back to specific metrics that you're gathering for that process or product. But a lot of them are going to be customer related, because you're supposed to have a customer focus in your quality system. And they should be focusing on what type of products you make and who your customers are. So yes, we're going to have lots of metrics, but not all of them are going to be quality objectives at the company level, and not all of them are going to be reflected in the quality policy. I've seen it done both ways. I've seen companies just have corporate ones and then have separate metrics for departments. And I've seen other people put all the metrics in their quality policy and in their quality, have them all be quality objectives. I had one company that had 29 quality objectives. Usually, companies that have lots of quality objectives don't meet the objectives and are spending too much time on that, and it's not effective. The company that I saw that actually had the most quality objectives, I would say arguably they had one of the best quality systems I've ever seen. But that was an exception. That's not the norm. Usually, companies do very well with a small set of quality objectives, 5 to 10 quality objectives that are linked to their quality policy, are customer focused, and focused on the kind of products they're making. Another comment here: should anything be done differently for writing findings on supplier audits? So when you are writing a supplier audit, and first of all, the answer is yes. There are some specific differences on writing a supplier audit. when you're going to audit a supplier, whether you're a consultant or you're an employee, sometimes you see things as an auditor because you can't help but see them that you're not supposed to be sharing with a company. So when you go in to do those, often they ask you to sign non-disclosure agreements, and there might be some things that you see there from a competitor that you're not supposed to see. You don't put references to those specific competitor products in your audit report. So you might have to be a little bit more obtuse in the wording and say, this record, or there was some product being made. You don't say what product because it's not your company's product. There was some product being made on this production line, and this is how it wasn't being done according to procedure. So you might go audit a molding line. They're not molding your product this time. So you might reference a part number. You say the part that was being run at the time. You might not say it's your competitor's product, but you can see it's your competitor's product. But you've signed a non-disclosure agreement and it's a supplier audit. So you just write down in the audit report very factual numbers, but don't put confidential information in there because that report is going to be in your company's records and you shouldn't be sharing that confidential information inadvertently through the whole company. So yes, I saw it, but I can't talk about it. I can only put down a record here of, I looked at this part number being made and it wasn't being made correctly. So that would be an example of how you would do things a little bit differently for supplier audits. You also have bigger differences in the reporting. A lot of times companies will not share the whole report with the supplier because the report has recommendations for whether you should keep the supplier or not. So that may be the purpose of the supplier is we're reevaluating the supplier and trying to decide whether to keep them on the list or gradually phase them out as a supplier. And you may not want to let the supplier know that right away. You may want to give them a chance to turn things around, but some of those details might be in the report as a conclusion or recommendation from the auditor and not necessarily shared with the supplier. You may only share certain parts of the report with the supplier. That's your choice. But the full report is in your quality system and can be looked at by any of the notified body auditors that are going to come around. That was all that I had planned on covering today. We had some fantastic attendance, 7 people on here right now, and we've had a couple of people jump in and jump out. I hope you got the essence of what I was trying to cover here is how to write an audit finding. And I'll recap it one more time. 5 things. Number 1, reference to the audit report and finding. Number 2, grading of the finding. Number 3, a 1-sentence description of what the finding is. Number 4, a specific quote from the requirement, whether it's procedural, standard, or regulations. And last but not least, detailed objective evidence. And the goal here isn't to put a whole long list. All you need is 1 piece of objective evidence. You might have seen others. You only need to put 1 in the report. It's the job of the person that writes up the CAPA to do an investigation of root cause and go find other objective evidence to determine how big this problem is. So if I saw 5 things, I might not put all 5 in the report as part of the finding. I might state those verbally. These were other things I found, but I didn't put them in the report. They might have been in a gray area and I wasn't sure whether they were non-conforming or not. But this one I found is very clear. It's definitely a non-conformity. And if I'm a notified body auditor, I would specifically do that because often I'm recommending the company for certification. I don't want to bury them with a real long finding of all this objective evidence of things that are not conforming. I don't think the process is a problem. I found several examples of things you need to fix. I'm going to put down the most obvious and straightforward one. This is your finding. But you should also address these other ones. And I put them in my notes so I'll remember next year when I come back. So that would be the way to handle cases where you see multiple pieces. And sometimes you might have multiple auditors saw the same thing in a team audit, but you're just going to take the most obvious of those and put those as your findings. So I hope that was helpful to people that are writing nonconformities. This month is specific topic is auditing or audit program management and auditing. So if you have any questions or topics that you'd like us to cover, please put it in our suggestion box. The last week I've had a couple of really great suggestion box topics come in to us. So go on our website, medicaldeviceacademy.com/suggestion-box. And if you type in the wrong URL, it'll automatically take you there because it's our 404 page as well. But put in a suggestion for a topic and we'll cover it either later this month or in the future. Or it might end up as a blog or a webinar. So any suggestions you have for topics are greatly appreciated. And I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.